Welcome, everyone. Recently, a student asked the perhaps dizzying question, what makes a great writer? When thinking about Dr. Carlos Hernandez, I think many of us would agree that he has achieved this designation. We knew.
I was
Of course.
in agreement.
I love it. Not only has his work been recognized through numerous awards, such as the Pura Belpré Award for his young adult novels Sal and Gabi Break the Universe, but his works leave us awestruck, as great writers can do. Recently, after reading one of his short stories, I had to pause and simply exhale, amazed by his capacity to create even the most enigmatic and unimaginable of spaces. Mirroring our symposium's topic, his images stay with us, asking us to rethink even our most primary existential questions. His works span numerous genres, including science fiction, fantasy, magical realism, the Gothic, and more. His writings also incorporate the history, practices, traumas, and losses of Latinx communities, giving voice to even uncomfortable truths about Western imperialism and racism. Dr. Hernandez teaches his readers about Cuban immigrants and Cuban Americans. We learn of the tastes, smells, sounds, for example, not only of the piano and pianist in his wondrous story, Fantasy Impromptu No. 4 in C minor, Opus 66, but read about Cuban women in Miami, can imagine the cafecito that the characters drink. His titles, such as the one for his role-playing game, Negocios Infernales, or his story collection, The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria, demonstrate the multiplicity of traditions from which he writes. In a poem written for his grandmother, he describes her belief in Santeria as, quote, some sense of self-awareness in a world of unpersonifiable dolor. His language itself innovates, creating a new space for his readers. As great writers often achieve, his creativity extends into other media. He teaches in the Interactive Technology and Pedagogy program at the CUNY Graduate Center, and he founded the CUNY Games Network. He also teaches in the English department at Borough of Manhattan Community College. You can read more about his work on his website, which he shares together with his wife, HERNANDOONEY.com. Sorry, I spelled that out. But please join me in welcoming Dr. Carlos Hernandez.
There's no recovering from an intro that good. I now have to be a superstar, and so if I suck, all that is about me because you did everything you could to set me up. Thank you so much. I am so happy to be here, everybody. Thank you for those of you who have stuck it through the day and those of you who have just arrived. I've had a great number of students from BNCC wandering in and out and getting to enjoy this 10th anniversary edition of this conference. I want to thank all the organizers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is an incredibly difficult thing to do year after year. It is exhausting work. I've been on your side of it, and I'm just extremely grateful that we still have places like this in CUNY where we can really think about science fiction, because I think it's the 21st century genre. It is the genre that helps us think the best about what we should do. I'm getting a lot of feedback. Is it just because I'm loud?
No
Hello?
Feedback. We can't hear any feedback.
You can't hear feedback? Okay. Maybe if I go like this, like this, like this, like this. All right. I don't know.
Whatever's comfortable for you.
I'm gonna try. No, I'm not.
Maybe move away from the receiver.
Yeah, is it this
Do you
thing?
want to sit over? Do you want to come over here?
Is it this thing?
I think it's you.
I think it's literally me.
But we need it.
All right. Forgive me. If I project thoroughly, will people be able to hear me? Can you hear me in that corner? Can you hear me in that corner? Okay. Forgive me. Today I want to talk to you about strangeness. This idea came to me first with the topic of the conference, talking about image in science fiction. And of course, we create images through words all the time. It's what we tell creative writers to do, speak through imagery, show, don't tell, all of that stuff. But it also comes out of a certain sect of people that I hear speaking, especially on the social media, saying like, oh, science fiction has lost its way, that, science fiction used to be so much better, and now it has lost its way in some way. And so I'm wondering if, there's a way that science fiction has indeed done that, or, if that's simply not understanding the genre where it stands right now. And I want to do that through the lens of strangeness, borrowing a concept from a very important literary critic we're going to get to in just a little bit. So my talk is contemporary science fiction strange? I discovered that when I use Keynote, I can do animations, and I might have gone overboard. Please forgive me. Okay, so my friends, I'm going to ask for a show of hands here. What I want to do is ask you if you find any of the 5 following images strange. All I need is a show of hands when you see something bizarre, otherworldly, incomprehensible appear on the screen. Raise your hand. Not a one. What I like about this image is this guy is 60 feet behind this guy, so he saw all this guy going up and was like, me too. That's the one thing I can say. There was a choice for dude number 2 there. Okay, not really a lot of takers there. I saw you, Josh. You're kind of wavering, but okay. How about this one? Is this strange? Okay, couple. I see a lot of this, this is the problem with raising hands. We need grades, I need a thermometer behind everybody so I can see what you think here. But not unanimous by any means. How about this? This kind of looks to me like Emma, the Harry Potter star, Emma Watson. Emma Watson, yeah. Okay, 1 strange, 1.5.
Cogs.
Strange? That's a big 0. That's a big, not a person. Okay, last one here. Right? Okay. Not exactly science fiction, but Photoshop. Still, this is what you can get these, by the way. Have you seen these little things you can put on the end of your hands? They always freak people out. But the thing is that, with the science fiction images especially, even if you haven't seen these specific images, you've kind of seen these images, right? We were hearing earlier the artist talking about this idea of we get 100 different rockets if 100 different people drew them. That's true, but I think we also have a platonic ideal of what the rocket is so that they'd all be recognizable in the genre as well. These are recognizable aliens and robots and spacecraft and bases out and floating in space. They're familiar enough that you know these things, even if you don't know these specific things. And that makes them cliches, right? So I guess part of what I want to think about is sort of what has become cliche in science fiction, and if it's so much that's become cliche that we've entered this sort of inescapable vortex of recursiveness where we aren't doing anything that we can call uncliched. We all know that cliches are bad. We've all taken our high school English classes where we're told to avoid all of those cliches, right? But let's think about why they're bad. Let's sort of really try to get down to the nitty-gritty here. And so, more animation. They have truck with received ideas, and I specifically use the phrase have truck to try not to say that phrase in a cliched way. But they barter with, they engage with, they connect with received ideas. And the problem with received ideas is that they don't advance knowledge. And I don't mean in necessarily the scientific sense. I'm much more talking about the James Canaveys of the world. I have no idea if people still read James Canavy, but I was forced to read him in graduate school, so I'm going to tell you about him. James Canavy wrote a book about the aims of discourse. The aims of discourse. And he posited that the one thing that you can say about declarative pronouncements in any language is that they have a point to them. And the point that they have to them are specifically there to pass on information that an audience is lacking. It's the only reason. If you have ever
been in a classroom, hopefully not mine, but maybe been in a classroom where somebody is rehashing knowledge you already know? You know what happens to your attention. Goes away. Because you know this and you don't need to pay attention. Other linguists have talked about the contract that's created between speaker and listener, and that there is a truth-trust contract between the two. That I'm going to be speaking a truth to you right now. And the listeners, I'm going to trust that you are trying to speak a truth that will be useful to me. As a fundamental unit of basically any act of declarative communication. Of course, we have interrogatives and we have other modalities as well. But when you think about that declaration, the point of that is absolutely to convey information that's not just information, but that it's somehow useful, amusing, entertaining, delightful. Whatever it is, it advances knowledge. And the lack of originality in a cliche promotes complacency of mind, what we could call boredom. I know you can think of other things too. That's my little etc. bullet there. But you know why cliches are bad. They don't give you anything. So we can think of the opposite of cliche as an original thought, but then we're left with the problem of what is original thought. So let's see if we can do that. And we can start. We can start with, okay, let's just do the reversal of all of those bullet points. They do not have truck. They have no truck with received ideas. They advance knowledge, and the originality in them promotes enrichment of mind and other things as well. But you can think about the idea of like what originality does to us, how we get excited about originality in the same way we get excited about first love. The surprise that's built into originality hits us before we understand it. Or it's like laughter too. We have these intellectual processes in our mind that affect us here before we can cogitate them here. And originality is one of those things that does that. If you've ever read Arthur Koestler's The Act of Creation, it's one of the things I would recommend to people in terms of like this philosophy. He takes three different modalities. He takes humor, art, and science, and he talks about each of them, the way that they are useful to the human spirit, and how each of them has this sort of like inherent component that reaches into you emotionally before you can finally cogitate it. So he uses humor to begin the book, which I think is a brilliant move, because sometimes you've done this. You've laughed at a funeral. You have started giggling at church. You have started to engage in something that was unstoppable inside of you that you knew was inappropriate. Why? Why do we laugh? What is the idea of, you said a pun, ha 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 ha, like what is this? What is this weird, motion that's happening in my mouth and this weird projection? Like what is that laughter? And it's such a strange and utterly human response that we have. So he uses that idea of like how we are affected in humor and then translates it to the moments of genius that we discover in art, the epiphany. But then he also talks about the eureka moment, the eureka that happens in scientific discovery. All of those are three kingdoms, you could say, of all of those possibilities inside of the human mind. And so those three things are what we can talk about when we're talking about enrichment of mind. Sure, but we can go deeper. Can we get even more original? Luckily, we can, because we have estrangement that was given to us as a gift by Darko Suvin, who is the winner of the literary critic with the most SF-sounding name award. Darko Suvin! I would have a child and name him Darko Suvin Hernandez, and that would be like the best reason. I'm not having a child, apparently. But I have to say, this is being recorded, so I didn't do this, but I almost dressed him up as a Jawa for that joke, because he would make an excellent Jawa. But no, like, Darko Suvin, such a great name. But he's a very serious and important literary critic of science fiction. He's a structuralist and a taxonomist. He is seeking to describe what we can term a poetics of science fiction. And what we mean by poetics has nothing to do really with poetry per se, although it can be used in poetry. But a poetics is basically a systematized way of understanding how an art works, how an art form functions, the structure beneath it. You can think about sort of like the Russian formalists of like the late 19th and early 20th centuries as grand examples of people who were very interested in a poetics. And so he's actually using those Russian formalists and other people as well to try to figure out what is quintessential about science fiction. What distinguishes that subgenre from others? And okay, folks, we're going to take a deep breath and I'm going to give you some literary criticism. There are two languages I don't know that are referenced here. I'm going to read this to you, but then we're going to synthesize it, okay? So we're going to let the literary criticism wash over us like the water on a beach, and we're going to just be enveloped by it and just get what you can out of it, and then we'll try to clarify it here. So he says that the concept of estrangement was first developed on non-naturalistic texts. Non-naturalistic texts, he was talking about basically extra real text, fantastic texts, but non-naturalistic, that's what he means there. By the Russian formalists, and then there's this word that I know I can't say in Russian, but ostranene, maybe? Are there any Russian speakers in here?
I had a Russian.
Oh, how do you do?
What's up?
How do you say that?
Can you say the
Hey,
word?
can you say this word right here?
I can't see it. Can I go close?
I appreciate it. Yeah, the projector washes out the background, unfortunately. This one right here.
Strani? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that's a word that I didn't know. Ostrania? Okay. So, non-naturalists by Russian formalists and most successfully underpinned by an anthropological and historical approach in the work of Bertolt Brecht, our old friend Brecht. Keeps giving. He wanted to write plays for a scientific age. Those of you who know Brecht probably have heard that quote about him before. But here is what Brecht said. So here's what Suvin says Brecht says about Galileo. So here we go. While working on a play about the prototypical scientist Galileo, he defined this attitude with, do we have any German speakers? Okay, yeah, lay it on me here.
Verfremdungseffekt. Verfremdungseffekt.
Verfremdungseffekt.
Verfremdungseffekt.
Thank you. So, in his short organon for the theater, and here's what he says. This is actually the important part. You can ignore the rest of the stuff. Water on the beach here. A representation which estranges is one which allows us to recognize its subject, but at the same time, makes it seem unfamiliar. You recognize it, but it's weird, it's strange, it's odd, it's off kilter. So, and further, for somebody to see all normal happenings in a dubious light, he would need to develop that detached eye with which the great Galileo observed a swinging chandelier. Imagine, just in your head right now, a chandelier swinging slightly to and fro. Is that enough for you to make a scientific discovery that will change the world? Not me, but Galileo did. He was amazed by that pendulum motion, as if he had not expected it and could not understand its occurring, and thus enabled him to come at the rules by which it was governed. Now we're going to go slow. In other words, estrangement detaches the eye, thus allowing us to re-perceive reality in a way that allows for discovery. That is the removal of false received ideas and a more accurate representation of both ontology and philosophy. And in fact, I wouldn't necessarily even want to separate those two. It's hard to have an ontology without a worldview by which to understand it in the first place. This is why you're getting a quick Carlos hot take that my definition of SF is philosophy via ontology or ontological allegory. Science fiction texts tend to be highly allegorical. meaning that ideas are captured within the people and the objects, and sometimes they are extremely identifiable as philosophical concepts in motion with one another, characterized so that people can understand them better. One of the ways in which we heard about Asimov not being maybe the greatest at character, well, part of it is because he's writing in a much more allegorical mode than maybe literary fiction had become accustomed to in the 19th and 20th centuries. Okay, but so here's something that's really important. Subin's estrangement isn't unique to science fiction. Really what he's talking about is more an emphasis rather than something that isn't endemic to other parts of literature. All literature estranges. It's supposed to, you might even call it literature's job. The job is to estrange. And here's what I want you to sort of like think about here. While empiricist fiction scrutinizes life as it might be realistically unfolding, science fiction begins with premises that either cannot happen or have not yet happened. Those of you who are Chip Delaney fans, we mentioned Samuel Delaney earlier, will recognize this definition coming from his essay that I can never remember because he's a little trickster, that Delaney, and he has this title of an essay that's something like about 5,672 words or something like that. Do you remember what it is, Joy?
I do not.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So but like you have to remember the damn number. It makes it like impossible. But so in this essay, he gives definitions of science fiction as how they oppose to, say, nonfiction. And in nonfiction, this happened. That is the premise by which you are operating. And so when that trust is violated, you have a fundamental crack in the mission of nonfiction. But fantasy begins with a much different premise. Like, this cannot happen. There is no expectation that this will ever happen or ever has happened. And so we can think about science fantasy in that way. The way that Star Wars works, for instance, is often cited as one of the examples here. But there's this other postulation for science fiction specifically that has not yet happened. These things might happen in the future, and we could talk about the prophetic power of some science fiction. But that identifier is one of the ways he was splitting the genres there. So then, what science fiction does is it creates an alternate ontology. And the approach of that alternative ontology is to give you farsight, to let you peer into the future and see possible outcomes. Not guarantees by any means, but should things continue on this path, here is a logical extrapolation of what might be to come. And it seeks to do this through estrangement, to provide the distance required from our received notions, so that we can actually do the work of conceptualizing places that don't exist yet and would be hard to predict. We value science fiction when it gives us information that most of the population doesn't have available to them because they haven't done the work of the science fiction writer. And it does so through images. So this is the thing that I hope you remember more than anything, that science fiction, almost more than any other genre, I think the fantastic in general, but science fiction, because it's so mission-driven, to relay information that will be useful because this could be possible, it tries to give you as much of a grounding as it can. This is why so much science fiction is so plot-driven. The plot helps you situate yourself inside of the story. Now, mind you, situating yourself inside of a story is already an act where you have to, project yourself somewhere that would be impossible to be. That is, you're using your imagination to imagine things that are impossible. It happens in all fiction. But science fiction leverages that to the maximum degree. Or at least it used to. These images don't do that anymore. These images don't leverage our imaginations to the umpteenth degree to take us to a place where we no longer can imagine what is possibly happening in the future. Like, these are all received at this point. except maybe the weird hands. But I've seen it plenty of times on Insta. You know, you can go on and you can find these hands there and stuff. So this is the concern. Perhaps science fiction has become so ossified in its conventions that its original mission of estrangement is no longer a feature of the genre. That would basically mean that science fiction isn't science fiction. It is now functioning as some other vehicle. And you can think about ways in which science fiction could not be doing that mission and still be popular. You know, maybe it's performing a kind of fan service, it's making people feel nostalgic, and it's satisfying the idea of like, oh, I used to love this as a kid. All of these things that do not require estrangement. But if we're to believe Darko Subin, and we should, then we don't have this fundamental aspect of science fiction happening right now. But it's happening. Science fiction is just fine. And in fact, I would offer that we are in a science fiction fantasy renaissance right now with all of the good work that science fiction is doing. So let's think about the ways in which science fiction is working right now. And even as much as we love Darko Subin's name, think about ways in which we can maybe problematize this notion of estrangement. Let me give you some easy ways to do that first. I like to start with bullet points of easy, and then we'll try to go a little bit deeper. So, first of all, every genre is vulnerable to cliches. So it's like you're never going to have this pure genre that is always firing on all pistons and accomplishing all of its goals. You're always going to have, you know, the poetasters. One of my favorite words. You know, the poets who didn't quite make it, you know, and you know, are engaging and trying, but maybe are missing a couple of elements before they can achieve, you know, the kind of artistic epiphany that Arthur Kessler is describing. Every genre, of course, is not going to have everybody avoiding cliches, right? And then one of the ways that we know that science fiction is working really well is that there is so much literary fiction that's just plain science fiction. Not that the literary writers like to admit it. Man, there is just like a whole lineup of literary writers that I just want to be like, no, you're writing science fiction. No, you're writing science fiction. No, you're also writing science fiction. You know, and they just need to be woken up to the fact that when you are engaging in a kind of postulation of future events and you are engaging with another term from Darko Subin is the novum, which is basically this idea that the story can't function without whatever scientific or fabulous invention you have created. Literally, the story falls away if you don't have that novum. When you see all of these novae, you know, being put out as literary works, you just wonder, like, be cool, man. Like, why can't you say it's science fiction? Like, what's wrong? What's wrong with science fiction? But you know what? In my lifetime, I've seen a huge difference between the ways in which science fiction used to be thought of versus the way that it's thought of now. The importance is now just too grand. It's just too obvious to be ignored anymore. And so those literary writers, I think, are more and more engaging with science fiction because they see the value of the genre. And then, I think, again, this is basically a platitude, but useful to state out loud. It often takes time for artists to be recognized. It takes a while to think about people who are functioning on that bleeding edge of estrangement and, you know, challenging our notions. Like, sometimes things are just too weird the first time we see them. We don't know what to do them. We furrow our brows, we look away, but the images persist. They reside in us. And slowly, reader by reader, you know, subgroup by subgroup, fandoms develop, small coteries of critics gather around, and suddenly new artistic movements are formed. So this is exactly what I want to concentrate the most on here. This idea that it takes time to do this. This is the great Samuel Johnson, one of the absolute critic masters, maybe even the creator of English literary criticism. You know, wrote a very famous dictionary, just somebody who was the tastemaker of his time. He didn't like Tristram Shandy. Tristram Shandy, written by Lawrence Stern, is like one of these, you know, works that are just This guy was bonkers. He was postmodern before it was cool. It was so great. In his book, he has a whole blank page that there's like, I don't even know what to say anymore. You write something. I'm moving on to the next chapter. Like, Tristram Shandy, weird book, weird guy. Samuel Johnson's like, Tristram Shandy didn't last. Fast forward to 1997. Carlos Hernandez, in his graduate program, buying 6 books by Lawrence Stern because the man lasted indeed. He's wrong. Oh wait, I have an animation for this. He's wrong. Sorry, Samuel Johnson. You did a lot of things right, but Tristram Shandy, But it was weird. And so in his time, he wasn't able to cogitate. He wasn't able to comprehend its value and also, taste is what it is. But what I want to talk about more importantly is that what all estrangement still requires is suspension of disbelief. And this is a concept I'm sure everybody in the room has talked about, but maybe you didn't know it came from Samuel Taylor Coleridge when he was talking about how he created the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. So Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth, buds. They're like poet buds in England. And they had a great relationship. And in this passage that I'm quoting here from Coleridge, he's talking about the different creative processes between Wordsworth and himself. And he's like, Wordsworth is a master of taking the moment of reality and letting you see it fresh and new in a way that helps you reevaluate it. But that's not what he was doing. Here's what he says. My endeavor should be directed to persons and characters supernatural. Yeah. Or at least romantic, yet so as to transfer from our inward nature a human interest and a semblance of truth sufficient to procure for these shadows of imagination that willing suspension of disbelief for the moment which constitutes, I love this phrase, poetic faith. We have faith in the poetry that the poetry will guide us well. With this view, I wrote The Ancient Mariner. With this view, I shot that albatross. With this one, I became that gimlet-eyed, possessor of souls who immobilizes someone so he can just spill his guts. So yeah, this is the key part right here. We're going to procure from the shadows of the imagination that willing suspension of disbelief for that moment of poetic faith. Willing is the key word, though, because that means the reader has to buy in. No reader buy-in, no reading act, and therefore, dead words on a page. So, suspension of disbelief is a negotiation between writer and reader. And here's what I'd like to posit. Too much estrangement will alienate, oh wait, I have a joke here. Will alienate readers such as Samuel Johnson and a whole host of us. You've read something that you're just like, I don't get it. You've read something, right? I remember, encountering Kathy Acker.
I was just going to say Kathy Acker.
You were going to say Kathy Acker?
Kathy Acker as an undergrad. I don't feel that way now, but...
I don't feel that way now, but when I encountered...
Totally.
I'm going to say this into the camera. When I read Pussy, King of the Pirates, I was not ready for Pussy, King of the Pirates. It's just a wild, wild text. It just takes a lot to get into it. So I was estranged to the point where I couldn't even really make much sense of it. I also remember my first encounter with Finnegan's Wake. Any Finnegan's Wake fans? Woo. All right, we got a couple. Right on. How? How does one Finnegan's Wake? Well, I'll tell you how. You do it with a concordance. And so, the first time I was reading, it was like, holding it sideways, and, seeing if I could see a dolphin, if I could cross my eyes a little bit. Nothing was working, but then I read it with a concordance. So it's like, oh, these two women are having a conversation by a river, and then they're going to turn to stone by the end of it. Great, ready to go. That's what it took, like a little bit of a précis, of a footnote, of a scaffolding, and then I was at least able to find some inroad into it. So, here it is. Here is the mission of science fiction. SF writers must evoke images that possess enough of a grounding for readers to be able to willingly suspend disbelief. They have to want to do it, while also generating enough estrangement to provide the signature experience of science fiction, that of postulation reimagining, and useful conjecture, I will die on the hill that science fiction, more than some other genres, it's meant to be didactic. It is meant to be more didactic than others. Even though it is couched in all of the adventure, it's meant to give you information about how things should be done, because this might possibly one day, maybe, maybe not, but maybe happen. And because of that, it holds at this didactic edge, this idea of like, I'm telling you this story for a reason, and it's a good one. Here's a simple way to put it. SF must bridge estrangement through familiarity. That is, familiarity becomes the way in which we can swallow the weird. And once we can swallow the weird, then we can get to that point of discovery of, here's a great word for discovery I love, afflatus. Yes, it also sounds like flatus, which, you know, this appeals to Carlos, because I'm nearly a 12-year-old. But afflatus just means that idea of discovery. And that's what we're seeking a lot of times in science fiction. We're seeking that feeling of like, whoa, I have never seen that before. You gave me such a nice introduction, and you mentioned that you had that feeling where you just sort of like, you know, had to look up for a second. Like that 1,000-yard stare at the end of a book. Have you ever read a book and you just like, you finish it and you're just like, I don't need another book for like 72 hours. Like I am like good and full, and this just needs to sit here and live here and be in here. It's like one of the best feelings in the world. Let me. Oh, I looked at you because I'm like, oh, it's not as good as being married to you, honey. But estrangement from middle grade. So one of the things that I got really lucky with in my life is that I got to write Sal and Gabby for the series Rick Riordan Presents. Just a very quick story, and I'll check my time to make sure I'm not going too long here. I'll finish up in just a second. But so, in the Sal and Gabby books, I only got to write them because I won lotto. Like I actually don't get to win lotto because I already won my career lotto. I wrote a book, as you mentioned, The Assimilated Cuban's Guide to Quantum Santeria. It came out from a small press collection of short stories. My first, collection. My first, thing that's long as opposed to short stories. And it's not great for an unknown author to publish a collection of short stories and expect much from it. Like, you don't often get a lot of play from that. But let me tell you how I hit the lotto. For no reason in the universe that can possibly be justified, Rick Riordan read it. And for even less reason, he liked it. And there's just no way, like planets would form before this series of coincidences would happen. He gave it 5 stars on Goodreads. And then it was just like, dang, But then the most magical thing happened. He gave it to his editor at Disney, Stephanie Lurie, and he was like, hey, do you like this? And she was like, yeah, I like this. And like, why don't we ask him if he wants to write for Rick Riordan Presents? I had never written a thing for children before. I was kind of like, not writing for children. Like, if you look at Assimilated Cuban's Guide, you will see one of the stories is called The International Stud Book for the Giant Panda. And in that story, there is panda sex that is initiated by somebody controlling basically, a big panda suit where they're trying to collect the species because pandas suck at sex. They're so bad. You know they suck at sex, but they're actually worse than you think. Like, I've done the research. They suck so bad that there's a book that collects every time a panda has sex. It's called The International Stud Book of the Giant Panda. That's a literal book that exists. And every time a panda copulates, they write it down. That's how little they copulate. You can literally write down every single time that they have sex. Ludicrous. I wasn't writing for kids. I was fascinated by panda sex. But then they were like, hey, maybe this guy can write for kids. So what I learned when I was writing this is that kids are brilliant. Kids are super smart. They know everything adults know, They ask all the same questions, like when I've done school presentations, they ask all the same great questions about, oh, what is it, where do you get your ideas, what are the best steps to be a writer, how do you create worlds? They say all of those same things, but then they will also ask you what your favorite Pokemon is, and you better have an answer. The answer, by the way, is Lickitung, because there is no Pokemon weirder than Lickitung with its 12-foot tongue. And so it is just great. You need to have your answers. And so kids are ready for the multiverse. They're ready to talk about the multiverse. There's enough in the zeitgeist for them to engage with this idea of there are multiple universes out there. I don't think this would have happened in 1942 in the same way. There's something about the zeitgeist that helps feed the imagination and guide certain kinds of conversations. But there was still that bridge that needed to be created by look, I'm going to be talking about these scientific concepts in a fun way, I hope. But how do I make it fun? Well, let me tell you, my answer for Fix the Universe, that came about through the use of a toilet. If you know anything about the middle grader, is that they are fascinated by body humor and toilet humor. And so the moral center of Sal and Gabby Fix the Universe is the sentient toilet voragine, which in Spanish means whirlpool. And so voragine is giving us the best, most logical arguments about how to be a good person in the world, because toilets are funny. I feel like that's the end of my conversation, so yeah, let's talk,
First of all, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that, especially because you talked about a writer who I've been working on for years, Lawrence Stern. So I have a possible scenario that I'd like to present to you.
Okay, nice and loud,
Real quick.
please.
So in Tristram Shandy, Lawrence Stern describes the most beautiful woman in the eyes of part role of whoever, it doesn't matter. But instead of a description, he leaves a blank page. And he tells the reader, fill it in as much as you dare that your wife might see this, be careful, but make the beautiful woman yourself. So he's playing with all these conventions. So in a way, what you're talking about with avoiding the cliches and things like that, I would say that Lawrence Stern is almost like a science fiction author, and the science he's dealing with is fiction, right? Being that postmodern, before it was postmodern, so he's projecting it to the future. And I don't think people give him enough credit for that. I mean, they do for the literary, but the scientific way of dealing with ideas of vision and imagination and optics is all over it.
I think you could make that argument fantastically. The distinction I would draw, though, is that he's not imagining things that are in the realm of impossible to happen in the world in the present time. So if we're looking at sort of the Samuel Delany idea of this hasn't happened yet, people have ogled women in this world. They have imagined beautiful women, and they could do that. I think what he's doing, though, is literary fiction, but like I said also, estrangement also happens in literary fiction. So one of the things I want you to all just understand is that the biggest piece of fantasy that any book can ever engage in is third-person omniscience. What a miracle third-person omniscience is. You get to see the entire landscape, you understand the politics behind everything, you zoom in and out of people's brains. Nobody gets that view of life. We're trapped in here. I can't zoom around and see how much everybody's enjoying or not enjoying my presentation right now. But the third-person omniscient out there, whoever created the simulation or whatever, they're looking down and they can see everything at once. That is a miracle of an idea, right? The God's eye view. See, that's what I said, literary fiction engages in all sorts of estrangement for the purpose of scrutiny. It's just that science fiction adds on. This isn't yet possible in this world. So I can't remember if there's anything in Tristram Shandy off the top of my head that was not possible in this world, but I don't think so.
There is.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, there is. There's a black page with no words. It's just a black inked out page.
Oh yeah, in a postmodern sense, I would say, but in terms of the events of the story, I don't think I remember anything. But yes, and I love Tristram Shandy for all of those hijinks that it pulls.
Other questions? Comments?
Oh, yes.
I was really drawn to your quotations about Coleridge and the suspension of disbelief and such. I first learned about the term suspension of disbelief through the locus from which I approach pretty much all of science fiction, which is Twilight Zone, which notably was written by a person who previously did not write science fiction or fantasy. That was sort of his way of delivering message and such. And so that sort of leads me into my question. Do you, in sort of your own research and your deliberations on this, do you find that estrangement is effective at, I guess what I would call moralizing or messaging, or can it be a barrier thereof?
That's a great question. I think depending on the work, it can be either or both. And I think, when I'm thinking about the sorts of things that estrange me, if I'm thinking about texts specifically. So one of my favorite texts is Catherine Dunn's Geek Love. You've encountered Geek Love. Geek Love estranged me paragraph by paragraph. And, it's a circus family. They have this huge, massive, truck, and the grandfather's ashes are basically the hood ornament. So, you just start there, and it just gets progressively weirder and gruesome and bizarre. And I think at times I would bump into things and be like, I don't know what to do with that. And I'm just going to keep reading and just try to absorb a gestalt. And other times, there's definitely messaging going on. There's definitely moments where you morally react against the character's actions. When the parents basically, feed the mother basically this potion that will create circus freaks, deformities and babies in utero, morally repugnant, and it's meant to be, and it is an estranging act that shouldn't work, but it consistently does, and even creates, and I put this in quotes, a dragon. It's a piece of magic that the whole story would fall apart if it didn't happen, but it's absolutely full of judgment as well. It is that. So if I'm thinking about individual texts, I think the most sophisticated ones are going to use estrangement variously. Sometimes as a moralizing agent, but sometimes just to give us something that we have not beheld before, because interest is its own value. And interest is worth something. If you create something that generates more interest, you have done an artistically successful thing.
I have a question, actually, and I don't know. I started rereading, and I'm sorry I forgot the name of the text. Probably a lot of you have read it, by Roland Barthes about pleasure as readers, right? And the question of, so I don't know if this is answerable, but I mean, where do you think that comes into play here with estrangement and the desire from the reader for certain experiences, let's say, from the text? And I know there are a lot of different nodes there, but I'm just wondering.
Right, and you're asking specifically, what is the role of pleasure in the reading experience,
Yeah.
and how does it play against or with estrangement, right? So we have different palettes, right? And so there are readers out there who will see the first whiff of fantasy and be like, nope, no way. I had a very funny story. There was a person who wrote me a fan letter, and it was the mom of a child, and they were, I think it was somewhere like in Ohio. They were around a campfire in the summer, and the kid called her. She was reading by the fire, and she called out to her mom, who was in the kitchen at the time. She's like, "Mom, it's science fiction!" And the mom's like, "Oh, you don't like science fiction?" She's like, "No, but this one's okay." The thing is, estrangement can sometimes put up barriers immediately, but sometimes we develop our taste a little bit, and maybe we grow accustomed to being ready for estrangement. So I think an act of sophistication is being ready for the estrangement that authors can offer. Not everything. It doesn't mean accept everything, but it does mean the idea that we can grow as readers and thinkers by being more prepared to live with the weird beside us and let it occupy the same space and see if something of fruit comes. Yes.
It's kind of a two-pronged question. Do you think technological advancements, as well as, I'm talking discovering more about science, physiology, science, biology, those things. Do you think that helps or hinders the genre? And then also, I forgot the second point, so it doesn't matter.
Okay. So does advancement hinder the genre?
Yeah, or does it push it?
Hell no.
Yeah.
Advancement's awesome.
Yeah, of course,
and the
yeah.
more we learn, the more we have to write about.
Yeah.
There's a dearth, an absolute like paucity of science fiction about chemistry.
Yeah.
Like we have a lot of physics and very little chemistry when so much great, interesting work is happening in chemistry. We could use more biology too. You know, there are sciences that are just waiting to be mined,
Yeah.
you know, by the right writers and you know, the right audiences to find it. One of the stories in Assimilated Cubans Guide is called The Aphotic Ghost. And I wrote it because I found out that some jellyfish are immortal. They can basically unwind their aging, and they often do it, you know, to save themselves with the like salinity or other things like that are happening in the ocean. But they age backwards for a while, and then they go forward again. And I was thinking when I read that, I was like, this would be the coolest were story I could possibly write. The were jellyfish. I have never seen a were jellyfish, and this immortal were jellyfish, this would be an exciting thing. So that's where my novum came from, but it only came because I was reading science articles in the New York Times, you know. So yeah, more science, you know.
Yeah. Oh, I remember the second part. I'm sorry. I was gonna kind of aligned with that is I think the coronavirus pandemic that and like lockdown, I think that I wonder if that pushed the genre forward or if it felt like, well, like I don't know, just like when our world is so novel and strange in a situation like that, like how does that impact our writing and how does that push our writing forward, or does it actually feel like, okay, well, I was writing about something like that, so how do I advance it? How do I make it even stranger? And I think that's like, can be very difficult.
Yeah, 100%.
I guess it's not really a question, I'm sorry.
There is, no, it's a great question, and it talks about like how science fiction, to follow Ezra Pound's dictum that you speak in the language of your day.
Yeah.
That, you know, science fiction writers do that to the umpteenth degree.
Yeah.
As much as they might be writing about possible futures, they're also writing about the right now. So Claire and I, we've talked about this, about how the stories that were written in 2019 and 2020 are starting to appear in magazines and on shelves now. And it's so surprising that there's just a great deal about fascism, you know? You know? There's a great deal, you know, about illness and pandemic and other things like that. You know, so like science fiction is always about the now, you know, whatever else it's about, which is another reason why it tends to be a slightly more didactic form, unless you're Frank Wu, and then it's just Venus sword fights.
Well, I think also like horror fiction would also be similar because horror plays on the idea of what we're afraid of. So you see robots in the 80s and you see robots now and, you know,
and
dystopia,
zombies,
zombies, dystopia, vampires in the early aughts, you know. And
there's a reason why horror is an ascendancy right now, you know, and I think, you know, it very much reflects
but
the
it
state
took
of
a plunge
mindset.
from 2020 to 2022. Nobody wanted it then, but people were writing it because they had to.
They were seeing it, they were feeling it.
And it's countered then by other movements like hope punk and echo punk, which are ways in which people are maybe trying to think about different futures and literally counter that idea. I think we're probably out of time, right?
Well, we have 3 minutes. Any other questions or
Okay.
comments?
So-
there we are. Over there. Yes.
So I have a question inspired by your slide presentation, which is very lava-lampy.
Yes, it is.
Because, you know, in your discussion, you're like, science fiction is all about now. Yet, you know, these processes of estrangement, depoliticalization, or austerity, right? They're all about unsettling. And I'm wondering whether you see any connection between when they unsettle things that inspire or evoke elements of nostalgia, or whether there's more success when it kind of tracks in on those like nostalgic moments.
Interesting. So, to me, in my mindset, and we can talk this out for a second, I think of nostalgia and estrangement as opposite. That is like, nostalgia is something that you're yearning for that you already know and want again. It is a known quantity. Versus estrangement, which is the thing that you don't quite cogitate fully yet and need to get your hand around, or you're just going to walk away from it because it's too strange. Can you tell me a little bit more about the connection?
I'm only thinking, like, if you see elements that are nostalgic or evocative of that, they draw you in, and so you're like, that's really unfamiliar, but it reminds me of this. And this is, it's that push and pull that kind of pulls you into the story.
Oh yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
yeah.
Finish your thought.
No, but that's what I was saying, because I'm like thinking there's a lot of nostalgic references in science fiction, right? And there's like, oh yeah, I see that, I picture that. I can see myself at 12, and I remember that feeling, that sensation. And so it kind of like sneaks in by using these, nostalgic tracks, right, to pull you in.
So this is what I meant.
It's a tension that's really fascinating.
Right. So estrangement through familiarity. That is the slide I think where I was trying to capture exactly that idea that you had there. Because without some familiarity, we just can't comprehend it. I have an exercise that I do in some of my composition classes where I'll begin the class and say, it's like, okay, everybody, here's what I want you to do. Please think of a thought that you would bet your life on nobody has ever thought before. Just right now, think one thought nobody has ever in the history of humanity thought before, or you die. Everyone's dead.
We're all gonna
like it would be so hard to do that in the moment, right? It's just how? Like a bird with a unicorn horn. Like it would just die in that under that kind of time pressure, right? This is why we value science fiction writers, because they take us to places that are truly original when things are firing on all pistons. We have other questions?
Well, it's 5 o'clock, so I don't know if Jason, what do you?
Maybe one last question.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. You mentioned Finnegan's Wake and how you basically needed a guide to understand it.
Yeah.
I tried reading it and just gave up.
Yeah.
So, when you're an author and you're writing estrangement, how do you know that you're writing something that's going to keep the audience engaged? How do you know you're just being self-indulgent?
Yeah, it's a great question. The answer is there's no such thing as an audience. There are 1 million micro-audiences. So basically you can't write something to please everybody. And if you did, you would be literally saying pablum that would not be communicating anything new. Like that's one of the things you have to come to grips with. That if you're writing, you're doing it because you are going to reach some people who will understand something in the same way that you do and maybe be of value to them. So in the Sal and Gabby books, let me go back to this one because I want you to see Break the Universe. In the Sal and Gabby books, Gabby Real has something like 14 dads. Because dad is not like a harem or a marriage contract. It's an honorific that male figures who have been valuable to her in her life receive. There's also a cat that is called dad. So it's an honorific that gets passed around a lot. But as soon as you say the word dad, and it's she explains it, in the book why she uses that word and everything. But as soon as you say that, people are like, oh, but who's her real dad? And I never tell, and I never will. And all those 1-star reviews on Amazon can suck it.
That's probably a great note.
Yeah! Suck it, Amazon!